Did you know that you shall give an account of every careless word you have ever spoken? Jesus said in Matthew 12, verse 36, Verily I say unto you, that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. For by thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned. In this video, I shall be revealing 7 things you should never say to God no matter what. Number 1. God, why me? This is a very popular phrase many people say without understanding what it really means. Even though this statement sounds innocent, it actually does reveal more of your state of heart than you might think. When you say, God, why me? What you're really saying is, God, I don't deserve this. Someone else should be going through this instead of me. It's a subtle way of playing the victim and implying that God is being unjust. When you say, God, why me? The question you should ask yourself is that who should it be? Do you feel someone else deserves to go through pain in your place? Trials are not unusual for a Christian. In fact, they should be expected. In 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12, it says, Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you. The Apostle Peter is reminding us that trials are not unusual for believers. Instead of asking, why me, you should be asking, God, what are you trying to teach me through this? Or, Lord, how can I glorify you in this situation? This perspective aligns more closely with what James tells us in James chapter 1, verses 2 to 4, where he says, My brethren, count it all joy when ye fall into divers temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. James is encouraging us to view our trials as opportunities for growth and maturity. When you ask, why me? You're focusing on the pain rather than the potential for growth. Think about Job. Here was a man who lost everything, his wealth, his children, his health, and much more all in one day. If anyone had the right to ask, why me? It should have been Job. Yet in Job chapter 1, verse 21, we see his remarkable response. Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Job's response teaches us that our circumstances don't define God's goodness or his love for us. When we ask, why me? We're essentially questioning God's wisdom. We're saying, God, I know better than you do. Instead of falling into this trap, you should rather say, God, I don't understand why this is happening, but I trust that you're working all things for my good, as you promised in Romans chapter 8, verse 28. This approach acknowledges God's sovereignty and our limited understanding. Remember, everyone in life goes through different challenges. Some people's crosses may seem heavier than others, but God knows exactly what each of us can handle. Number 2, making rash vows to God. The second thing you should never say is making careless promises or vows to God. This happens quite a lot, much more than you think, especially when people find themselves in a desperate situation and suddenly start promising God the moon and the stars if he'll just do something for them. They say, God, if you make me pass my exams, I'll never miss church again. Or, Lord, if you help me get this job, I'll give half my salary to charity. This might seem like a statement of faith, but it is not always a good thing. While the intention behind your vows might seem innocent, they're actually quite dangerous, because they reveal that you are trying to trap or manipulate God. But here is the problem. When you make such vows, you are actually telling God 2 things. First, you are telling God that you are very strong and can do it in your power. And whenever you trust in your strength, you will most likely fall. Secondly, you are telling God that he can be bribed. In fact, the most dangerous part is that if you fail to keep your part of the deal, the devil will always attack the very thing you received. The Bible paints this perfectly. In Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 4 to 6, we read, When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better is it that thou shouldest not vow than that thou shouldest vow and not pay. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin. Neither say thou before the angel that it was an error. Wherefore should God be angry at thy voice and destroy the work of thine hands? Notice that the passage says God will get angry and destroy the works of your hands. That is very crucial. This passage is a stern warning against making hasty vows. The writer of Ecclesiastes is saying that it's better not to make a vow at all than to make one and not fulfill it. I have seen people who, out of pressure, they make all kinds of promises to God they very well know they won't keep. And the funniest thing is that God will always keep his part of the promise. This is a fact. When we make rash vows to God, we're essentially saying, God, if you do this for me, I'll do that for you. But God is not a vending machine. He doesn't operate like that. His love for us and his actions on our behalf are not dependent on what we can offer him in return. In fact, this kind of bargaining suggests that we believe we need to bribe or persuade God to act on our behalf, rather than trusting in his goodness and wisdom. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, verse 8. Be not ye therefore like unto them, for your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask him. Moreover, when we make rash vows, we often overestimate our own ability to keep that promise. In the heat of the moment, we might promise things that are unrealistic or even impossible for us to fulfill. This sets us up for failure and potential guilt when we inevitably fall short. Think about the story of Jephthah in Judges chapter 11. He made a rash vow to sacrifice the first thing that came out of his house if God granted him victory in battle. Tragically, it was his only daughter who first greeted him upon his return. This devastating consequence of a hasty vow serves as a sobering reminder of the weight our words carry before God. Now you might be thinking, but didn't people in the Bible make vows to God? Yes, they did. But it's crucial to understand that these were not desperate bargains made in moments of crisis. They were thoughtful, intentional commitments made with a full understanding of the implications. For instance, in 1 Samuel chapter 1, we see Hannah making a vow to dedicate her son to the Lord's service if God blessed her with a child. This wasn't a hasty promise made in panic, but a carefully considered commitment that Hannah was prepared to fulfill. In the New Testament, we see a shift in how believers relate to God. We live under a new covenant, one based on grace rather than law, as Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. The Greek word for grace here is charis, which implies unmerited favor. Our relationship with God is not based on what we can do for him, but on what he has already done for us through Christ. This understanding should free us from the need to make rash vows or bargains with God. Instead of making hasty promises, we should approach God with faith and trust. In 1 John chapter 5, verse 14, we're told, And this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he heareth us. The key phrase here is according to his will. Our focus should be on aligning our will with God's, not trying to bend God's will to match our desires. So the next time you find yourself tempted to make a rash vow to God, pause and reflect. Instead of saying, God, if you do this, I'll do that, try saying, God, I trust in your goodness and wisdom. Help me to accept your will, whatever it may be. This approach better acknowledges God's sovereignty and demonstrates true faith. Number 3, I will stop serving you. Sometimes when things don't go our way, we may be tempted to threaten God by saying that we will stop serving him. I have heard people say this time and time again, but the truth is, we need God more than he needs us. Sometimes we make this statement out of arrogance, almost as though without us, God will stop functioning. Our service to God is not doing him a favor. It is actually us who need him. If you stop serving him, he will not cease to be God. He always remains on the throne. If something happens to you that you don't understand, ask him through prayers. But never make threats. We cannot help God. It is the other way round. Remember the story of the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. The son thought he could do better on his own. He left, thinking the father would come begging him. But what happened? It was the son who realized how desperately he needed the father. In Luke chapter 15, verses 17 to 19, we read, And when he came to himself, he said, How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father. This parable beautifully illustrates something. We may think we're doing God a favor by serving him, but in reality, we're the ones who benefit from being in his presence and under his care. Number 4, God, you owe me. Have you ever found yourself thinking or even saying to God, After all I have done for you, you owe me something? The truth is, God owes us nothing, absolutely nothing. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We owe him everything. In Romans chapter 11, verse 35, Paul asks a rhetorical question, or who hath first given to him? The implied answer is no one. No one has ever given to God first. When it comes to our relationship with God, we are the ones eternally indebted to Him. He gave us life, sustains us every moment, and offered us salvation through His Son, Jesus Christ. When you say, "You owe me," you're essentially putting yourself in the position of God's creditor. It's as absurd as a clay pot demanding payment from the potter who formed it. Isaiah chapter 45 verse 9 addresses this kind of thinking. Woe unto him that striveth with his maker. Shall the clay say to him that fashioneth it, What makest thou? This attitude of entitlement often stems from a works-based mentality, thinking that our good deeds somehow put God in our debt. But the Bible is clear that our righteousness is as filthy rags before a holy God. Isaiah chapter 64 verse 6. Our salvation and every good thing we receive are by God's grace, not our merit. Even when we serve God faithfully, Jesus reminds us of the proper attitude in Luke chapter 17 verse 10. So likewise ye, when ye shall have done all those things which are commanded you, say, We are unprofitable servants. We have done that which was our duty to do. Instead of thinking God owes us, we should cultivate an attitude of gratitude for His unmerited favor and grace in our lives. As Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 7, For who maketh thee to differ from another? And what hast thou that thou didst not receive? Now if thou didst receive it, why dost thou glory, as if thou hadst not received it? So the next time you're tempted to say, God, you owe me, pause and reconsider. Instead, try praying, Lord, thank you for all you've given me. I don't deserve your blessings, but I'm grateful for your grace and mercy. Help me to trust in your goodness and to use what you've given me to serve you and others. This prayer acknowledges God's generosity, expresses gratitude, and aligns our hearts with His purposes. 5. God, prove yourself. This one is probably one of the most common. How many times have we found ourselves in situations where we demanded God to prove Himself or His existence? We want tangible evidence, a sign that He's real and that He cares. But here's the shocking truth. God is too big and too magnificent to be pressured into proving Himself to us. He is just too big. In fact, nature itself proves who God is. He needs not to prove Himself. Think about it for a moment. The creator of the universe, the one who formed galaxies with a word and breathed life into existence, doesn't need to explain Himself to us. It's like an ant demanding that a human prove their existence. The very notion is absurd when we consider the scale of God's power and wisdom compared to our own. Psalms 19 verse 1 says, The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth His handiwork. Romans 1 verses 19 to 20 also says, Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. For God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of Him, from the creation of the world, are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. In the book of Job, chapter 38, verses 1 to 4, we see God's response to Job's demands for an explanation. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. This powerful passage reminds us of our place in relation to God. We weren't there when He created the world, and our understanding is limited. Demanding proof from God is not only disrespectful, but also shows a lack of faith. 6. Asking God to punish or kill your enemies. Now let's tackle a particularly thorny issue. The temptation to ask God to punish or kill our enemies is a natural human instinct, isn't it? When someone hurts us deeply or causes us harm, our first instinct might be to cry out for their punishment. But as followers of Christ, we're called to a higher standard. In the Old Testament, we see numerous examples of people calling for God's judgment on their enemies. The Psalms, in particular, contain many such prayers. For instance, in Psalm 55, verse 15, David cries out, Let death seize upon them, and let them go down quick into hell, for wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. However, we need to understand these passages in their historical and covenantal context. The Old Testament often deals with national Israel and its enemies, and many of these prayers were about God's judgment on those who opposed His chosen people and His plans. In the New Testament, we see a radical shift in this perspective. Jesus introduces a revolutionary way of dealing with enemies. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 to 44, He says, Ye have heard that it hath been said, Thou shalt love thy neighbor, and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. This is a complete paradigm shift. Jesus is calling us to love our enemies, not pray for their destruction. In 1 Kings 3, verses 10 to 11, God said something remarkable. He asked Solomon for anything he wanted, but Solomon asked for wisdom. The Bible said, And the speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding, to discern judgment. Notice that God praised Solomon for not asking for the lives of his enemies. This was a very crucial statement, so the next time you're tempted to ask God to punish or destroy your enemies, remember Jesus' words and example. Instead, try praying, Father, forgive them, and open their eyes to your truth. Work in their hearts, and draw them to yourself, and help me to love them as you have loved me. This kind of prayer has the power to transform not only our enemies, but also our own hearts. 7. God, I give up on you. This declaration of spiritual surrender is perhaps the most perilous of all, as it represents a complete abandonment of faith and trust in God. First and foremost, this statement reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of God's character and his unwavering commitment to us. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, we are assured, Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee, nor forsake thee. Remember, God is not intimidated by our questions, doubts, or struggles. He invites us to bring all of these to him honestly. As Psalm 62 verse 8 encourages, Trust in him at all times, ye people, pour out your heart before him. God desires an authentic relationship with us, one where we can be honest about our feelings and struggles. However, this honesty should always be tempered with reverence, trust, and a willingness to submit to his wisdom and sovereignty. Thank you for watching. If you love our videos, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel.